What happens when one of music's most private legends faces off against morning television's toughest interviewer and refuses to play by the rules? The answer involves a clash so intense that it left the Good Morning America studio in complete silence. Producers scrambling, and millions of viewers watching something they never expected to see on live television. Before we get into this, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me whose side you're on in this situation, because what you're about to hear is going to have you picking sides real quick. The interview started off simple enough. Janet Jackson was there to promote her new documentary series, a project she had been working on for years that dove deep into her life, her career, and her family legacy. Michael Strahan, co-host of Good Morning America and known for his charming but sometimes pointed interview style, was tasked with leading the conversation. The studio audience was packed, cameras were rolling, and everything seemed perfectly set for what should have been a standard promotional interview. Michael opened with his signature smile, welcoming Janet to the show with all the enthusiasm you would expect. The first few questions were softballs asking about her tours, her creative process, and what fans could expect from the documentary. Janet answered each question with grace, her responses measured and professional. She smiled at the right moments, laughed when appropriate, and seemed completely in control of the narrative she wanted to present. But then Michael shifted gears. His tone changed slightly, becoming more serious, more probing. He leaned forward in his chair, and you could see the journalist in him taking over from the entertainer. He asked Janet about her family, specifically about the complicated dynamics that had played out in the public eye for decades. It was a reasonable question, the kind that any interviewer might ask, given the subject matter of her documentary. But there was something in the way he phrased it that immediately changed the energy in the room. Janet's smile faded just a bit. Her posture straightened. She took a breath before answering, and when she spoke, her voice was calm but firm. She explained that, while her documentary did address family matters, it did so on her terms, in her way, and with the context that she felt was necessary. She made it clear that she was not interested in sensationalizing her family's story for entertainment value. Michael nodded, seeming to accept her answer, but then he pressed further. He brought up specific incidents, specific controversies that had made headlines over the years. He mentioned her brother, he mentioned the estate, he mentioned legal battles and public disputes. Each question felt like he was trying to get her to reveal something, to crack the carefully constructed image she had maintained for so long. Janet did not take the bait. Instead, she responded to each question with precision, acknowledging the topics without giving him the sound bites he seemed to be fishing for. She was polite but distant, professional but guarded. You could feel the tension building with each exchange, like a storm gathering on the horizon. Then came the question that changed everything. Michael asked Janet about her Super Bowl performance, specifically about the incident that had defined a moment in pop culture history and had, in many ways, overshadowed much of her work in the years that followed. He asked her if she felt that she had been treated fairly by the industry, by the media, and by the public in the aftermath of that moment. The studio went quiet. Janet's expression hardened. She looked directly at Michael, not with anger, but with a clarity that made it clear she knew exactly what was happening. She understood the game, and she was done playing it. She started her response slowly, deliberately. She said that the question itself revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of what she had experienced. She explained that fairness was not something she had been afforded, and that the very fact that people still brought up that moment, still used it to define her career, was proof of the double standards that existed in the entertainment industry. Michael tried to interject, to clarify his question, but Janet kept talking. Her voice remained calm, but there was steel in it now. She pointed out that he, as someone who had transitioned from sports to entertainment, should understand what it meant to be judged by a single moment rather than by the entirety of one's work. She said that she had spent decades building a legacy, creating art, breaking boundaries, and yet people still wanted to reduce her to one incident that she did not orchestrate and did not deserve to be punished for. The audience was completely silent now. You could hear the cameras still rolling, capturing every word, every expression. Michael looked genuinely taken aback. He opened his mouth to respond, but Janet was not finished. She continued, saying that she had come on the show to talk about her documentary, to share her story in the way she wanted it to be told, not to rehash old controversies for ratings. She said that she respected him as an interviewer, but that she expected the same respect in return. She expected him to honor the boundaries she had set and to focus on the work she was doing now, not the scandals that the media had profited from in the past. Michael tried to recover, saying that he meant no disrespect and that he was simply trying to have an honest conversation. He said that her fans wanted to hear her perspective, that people admired her resilience, and that he was giving her a platform to share her truth. Janet's response was swift and sharp. She said that a platform was not a gift when it came with conditions. She said that being allowed to speak was not the same as being heard. She told him that if he truly wanted to give her a platform, he would let her control the narrative instead of trying to steer it toward the moments that would generate the most controversy. The tension was palpable now. Michael looked uncomfortable. shifting in his seat. The producers were likely panicking in the control room, trying to figure out whether to cut to commercial or let the moment play out. Janet sat perfectly still, her gaze unwavering, waiting for his response. Michael took a breath and tried a different approach. He acknowledged her point, saying that he understood her frustration and that he appreciated her honesty. He said that he wanted to refocus the conversation on her documentary and on the positive aspects of her career. He asked her what message she hoped viewers would take away from her story. But Janet was not ready to let it go. She said that his attempt to pivot was appreciated, but that the damage had already been done. She explained that the questions he had asked were not innocent, that they were calculated to elicit emotional responses, and that she had been in the industry long enough to recognize when someone was trying to manipulate a conversation for entertainment purposes. She told him that she had agreed to the interview because she believed Good Morning America was a reputable program that would treat her with dignity. She said that she had been disappointed by his line of questioning and that she felt it reflected a broader problem in media, where women, particularly women of color, were expected to relive their trauma for public consumption. Michael looked genuinely stung by her words. He said that he had not intended to make her uncomfortable and that he had the utmost respect for her career and her contributions to music and culture. He said that he was simply doing his job as a journalist, which was to ask difficult questions and to seek truth. Janet's response was measured but firm. She said that seeking truth and seeking sensationalism were not the same thing. She said that a good journalist knew the difference and knew when to push and when to listen. She told him that she had been willing to be vulnerable in her documentary because she controlled the context, but that she was not willing to be vulnerable on live television for the sake of ratings. The silence that followed was deafening. Michael did not know what to say. Janet had effectively shut down the entire direction of the interview, and now they were at an impasse. The audience did not know whether to applaud or stay quiet. The other co-hosts, who had been sitting nearby, looked uncertain about whether to jump in or let the moment breathe. Finally, Michael spoke again. He said that he heard her, that he understood her concerns, and that he wanted to move forward in a way that respected her boundaries. He asked if she would be willing to continue the interview with a focus solely on the documentary and her current projects. Janet paused, considering his offer. Then she nodded slowly. She said that she would continue, but only if he agreed to let her speak without interruption and without trying to lead her toward predetermined conclusions. She said that if he could do that, they could have a productive conversation. If not, she was perfectly willing to end the interview right there. Michael agreed. He promised to let her lead the conversation and to focus on what she wanted to discuss. The tension in the room eased slightly, though the air was still thick with the weight of what had just transpired. Janet took a breath, composed herself, and prepared to continue. But it was clear that the dynamic between them had fundamentally shifted. Michael cleared his throat and adjusted himself in his seat, visibly working to reset the tone. He looked at Janet with what appeared to be genuine humility and asked her to tell the audience about the inspiration behind her documentary. In her own words, without any interruptions from him, it was a peace offering, an attempt to salvage what had become a notoriously tense exchange. Janet studied him for a moment, as if deciding whether to trust this new approach. Then she began to speak. Her voice was softer now, more reflective. She talked about how the documentary had been a decade in the making, how she had wanted to create something that was honest and comprehensive, something that showed not just the glamorous parts of her life but also the struggles, the sacrifices, and the moments of doubt that every artist experiences. She spoke about her creative process, about how music had always been her refuge and her way of processing the world around her. She talked about growing up in the shadow of immense talent and fame, and how she had to fight to establish her own identity separate from her family's legacy. Her words were powerful, authentic, and deeply personal. The audience was captivated, leaning forward in their seats, hanging on every word. Michael listened intently, nodding along, keeping his promise not to interrupt. For several minutes, the interview transformed into something beautiful, the kind of conversation that Good Morning America audiences tuned in for. Janet was open, eloquent, and vulnerable, in a way that felt earned rather than extracted. It seemed like maybe they had found their footing after all. But then Michael made a critical mistake. As Janet was finishing a thought about her evolution as an artist, he jumped in with what he likely thought was a supportive follow-up question. He said that her resilience was admirable, especially considering everything she had been through. And then he added that it must have been particularly difficult to rebuild her career after facing such public backlash. Janet stopped mid-thought. Her expression changed instantly. She looked at Michael with a mixture of disbelief and frustration. She said his name, slowly, deliberately, Michael. She told him that he had just done exactly what he promised he would not do. He had agreed to let her control the narrative, and yet he had steered the conversation right back to the very topic she had explicitly asked him to avoid. Michael immediately tried to backtrack. He said that he was not trying to dredge up the past, but he was simply acknowledging her strength and her ability to overcome adversity. He said that her story was inspiring and that people needed to hear about how she had persevered through difficult times. Janet was not buying it. She told him that there was a difference between acknowledging someone's strength and reducing their entire career to their struggles. She said that she was tired of being framed as a survivor, as someone who had overcome obstacles, when what she really wanted to talk about was her artistry, her vision, and her contributions to culture. She said that men in the industry were rarely asked to constantly revisit their lowest moments, but women were expected to perform their pain over and over again. The tension that had briefly dissipated came roaring back, even stronger than before. Michael looked genuinely distressed now. He said that he understood her point and that he had not meant to minimize her accomplishments. He said that he was simply trying to contextualize her journey, to show the full picture of who she was. Janet's response was sharp. She said that the full picture of who she was did not need to include every tabloid headline and every controversy that had been manufactured by the media. She said that the full picture should include her 8 studio albums, her world tours, her acting career, her philanthropic work, and her influence on generations of artists. She said that if he wanted to show the full picture, he should focus on the things that she had built, rather than the things that had been done to her. Michael sat back in his chair, clearly at a loss. He glanced toward the other co-hosts as if hoping one of them would jump in and help defuse the situation. But no one moved. They all seemed to understand that this was Michael's moment to navigate, and that any interference might only make things worse. After a long pause, Michael spoke again. His voice was quieter now, more measured. He said that Janet was absolutely right. He said that he had failed to honor the agreement they had made and that his framing had been unfair. He apologized, not with the practiced ease of a television personality, but with what seemed like genuine remorse. He said that he had let his instincts as an interviewer override his responsibility to respect her boundaries, and that he was sorry for that. Janet listened to his apology without expression. When he finished, she nodded slightly, acknowledging his words but not necessarily accepting them as sufficient. She said that she appreciated the apology, but that words were easy. What mattered was whether he could actually change his approach and conduct the rest of the interview with the respect he claimed to have for her. Michael agreed immediately. He said that he would do better, that he would focus entirely on her current work and her creative vision. He asked her if she was willing to give him one more chance to get it right. Janet considered this for a moment. The studio was so quiet you could hear the cameras worry. Finally, she said yes, but that this was his last chance. She said that if he veered off course again, she would end the interview and walk off the set, and she did not care if they were live on national television. She said that her dignity was more important than any promotional opportunity. Michael nodded, understanding the stakes. He took a breath and asked her a new question, this time about the specific artistic choices she had made in the documentary. He asked about the visual style, the narrative structure, and the decision to include certain elements while leaving others out. It was a thoughtful question, one that treated her as an artist rather than as a subject of gossip. Janet's demeanor softened slightly. She answered the question thoroughly, discussing her collaboration with the director, the editing process, and the intentional choices they had made to create something that felt both intimate and cinematic. She talked about using archival footage in unexpected ways, about the importance of music in telling her story, and about wanting to create something that felt timeless rather than trendy. Michael listened carefully, asking follow-up questions that built on what she was saying rather than redirecting the conversation. He asked her about her creative influences, about the artists who had inspired her throughout her career. Janet spoke about her love of different musical genres, about how she had always tried to push boundaries and blend styles in ways that felt fresh and innovative. Michael agreed enthusiastically, saying that her willingness to experiment had always set her apart. He mentioned specific albums, specific songs, specific moments in her career where she had zigged when everyone expected her to zag. For the first time in the interview, Janet smiled genuinely. She seemed pleased that he had done his homework, that he actually knew her catalog and could speak intelligently about her artistic evolution. The conversation continued smoothly for several minutes. They discussed her songwriting process, her approach to choreography, and her thoughts on the current state of the music industry. Janet was generous with her insights, sharing stories and perspectives that she had not discussed in other interviews. The audience was fully engaged, and it seemed like the interview had finally found its proper footing. But then he pushed too far one more time. He asked Janet about her legacy, about how she wanted to be remembered. It seemed like an innocent enough question, the kind that wraps up interviews nicely. But then he added a qualifier. He said that given everything that had happened in her career, both the triumphs and the controversies, what did she hope her lasting impact would be? The moment those words left his mouth, you could see Janet's entire body language change. Her smile vanished. Her shoulders tensed. She set down the water glass she had been holding and turned to face Michael directly. The look on her face was not anger. It was something closer to profound disappointment mixed with absolute resolve. She said his name again, Michael. Then she asked him a simple question. Did he genuinely not understand what he had just done, or was he deliberately choosing to ignore her boundaries? She told him that she had given him multiple opportunities to conduct a respectful interview, and every single time, he had found a way to circle back to the very topics she had explicitly said were off limits. Michael tried to defend himself. He said that legacy was an important topic, that it was natural to discuss someone's impact and how they wanted to be remembered. He said that he was not trying to bring up controversy, that he was simply acknowledging that her career had been complex and multifaceted. Janet cut him off. She said that the problem was not the word legacy. The problem was the phrase he had attached to it. Everything that had happened, both the triumphs and the controversies. She said that by framing her legacy in those terms, he was once again reducing her decades of work to a handful of tabloid moments. She said that was exactly the kind of framing she had spent the entire interview asking him to avoid. She continued, her voice rising slightly but remaining controlled. She said that if he had simply asked her how she wanted to be remembered, she would have given him a beautiful answer about artistry, innovation, and connection. But by adding that qualifier, he had revealed that he still saw her through the lens of scandal first and artist second. Michael looked genuinely shaken now. He started to say something, then stopped. He looked down at his notes, as if searching for a way to salvage the situation. But Janet was not finished. She told him that she wanted to be very clear about something. She said that she had agreed to come on Good Morning America because she believed it was a reputable program that would treat her with respect. She said that she had given him multiple chances to prove that her faith was not misplaced, and she said that he had failed, repeatedly, to honor the very simple boundary she had set, which was to focus on her work rather than on manufactured controversies. The studio was completely silent. The other co-hosts looked uncomfortable, unsure whether to intervene or let Janet finish what she was saying. The audience seemed to be holding their collective breath, understanding that they were witnessing something rare and unscripted. Michael finally found his voice. He said that he was deeply sorry, that he had clearly mishandled the interview, and that he took full responsibility for making her uncomfortable. He said that it had never been his intention to ambush her or to be disrespectful, but that he understood why she felt that way. Janet listened to his apology, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she took a moment before responding. She said that she appreciated the apology and that she believed he was sincere, but she also said that sincerity was not enough. She said that the damage had been done, not just to her, but to the viewers who had tuned in expecting to hear about her documentary. Then Janet did something that no one expected. She turned to face the camera directly, addressing the audience at home rather than Michael or the studio audience. She said that she wanted everyone watching to understand something important. She said that as women, as artists, as human beings, they had the right to set boundaries and to expect those boundaries to be respected. She said that they did not have to relive their trauma for other people's entertainment. She said that her documentary was her way of taking control of her narrative, of telling her story on her own terms. She said that she hoped everyone would watch it and see the fullness of who she was, not as a victim or a survivor or a scandal, but as an artist who had spent her entire life creating meaningful work and pushing boundaries. When she finished speaking, she turned back to Michael. She thanked him for his time, but her tone made it clear that the thanks were purely perfunctory. She stood up, removed her microphone, and walked off the set. She did not storm off dramatically. She simply walked away with her head held high and her dignity intact, leaving Michael sitting there in stunned silence. The cameras stayed on Michael for a moment, capturing his expression of shock and regret. Then they cut to the other co-hosts, who scrambled to transition to the next segment. But everyone watching knew that what had just happened would be the story of the day. Janet Jackson had not just shut down an interview, she had delivered a powerful statement about respect, boundaries, and the way women are treated in the entertainment industry. If you made it this far, make sure you hit that subscribe button, and drop a comment below telling me, do you think Janet was right to shut down the interview the way she did? Or do you think Michael was just doing his job as a journalist? Let me know your thoughts, because this conversation is far from over.